Selena Gomez stood behind the velvet curtains of a sold-out stadium in 2016, surrounded by the deafening cheers of tens of thousands of fans screaming her name, while her own body was quietly waging a war against itself. To the rest of the world, she was the undisputed queen of pop culture, a flawless icon of modern glamour, and the most followed person on global social media platforms. Yet beneath the heavy stage makeup and the multi-million-dollar corporate endorsements, her heart rate was spiking to dangerous levels, her lungs were gasping for air, and a profound, suffocating darkness was pulling her down into an existential abyss. The public consumed her music and dissected her high-profile romances with obsessive curiosity, completely blind to the reality that the young woman they idolized was fighting a literal battle for her life behind closed hospital doors. When she abruptly walked away from a massive world tour and vanished into a secluded psychiatric facility in Tennessee, the media corporate machine demanded answers, framing her disappearance as a typical Hollywood burnout. The truth, however, was far more terrifying than any tabloid headline could capture, involving a severe autoimmune crisis that was actively attacking her vital organs and systematically altering her brain chemistry. In this investigative journey by Inspired Stories, we uncover the hidden medical realities, the psychological trauma of near-fatal surgeries, and the profound personal reclamation that allowed this survival story to culminate in a baseline of genuine health and true happiness. You will discover how chronic physiological inflammation directly triggers clinical depression, the hidden psychological toll of receiving a life-saving organ from a close friend, and the deliberate steps that took her from the brink of total self-destruction to a stable, loving marriage with Benny Blanco. What really happens when the spotlight becomes a cage, and how does a person rebuild an entire identity from absolute rock bottom? Let us peel back the layers of public perception and look at the raw data of a modern resurrection. To understand the magnitude of the collapse that took place in 2016, we must first dissect the structural foundation upon which Selena Gomez's entire identity was constructed. The narrative peddled by Hollywood marketing departments often presents child stardom as a golden ticket, a seamless trajectory from obscurity to ultimate privilege. The empirical reality, however, is far more clinical and unforgiving. Identity development is a fragile psychological process, and when that process is subjected to the immense pressures of a multi-billion-dollar industrial machine before the prefrontal cortex is fully formed, the long-term consequences are profound. To find the root system of this survival story, we have to look past the neon signs of California and return to the economic landscape of Grand Prairie, Texas. Born to a teenage mother who was only 16 at the time of her birth, her early childhood was defined by structural scarcity, financial instability, and the acute stress of a single-parent household struggling to meet basic human needs. The daily anxieties of counting pennies for gasoline and wondering if the local grocery store would accept a late check left a permanent mark on her young mind. It created a deep-seated hypervigilance, a psychological state where survival is directly linked to performance and work ethic. When the opportunity arose to enter the entertainment industry through children's television programs, it was not merely an artistic pursuit. It was an economic lifeline for a family seeking structural stability. By the time she was uprooted and moved to Los Angeles, her existence had been completely commodified. The corporate apparatus of the Disney Channel functioned as a high-efficiency production line, transforming real children into highly profitable global brands. In this environment, personal validation becomes entirely dependent on public approval, continuous productivity, and maintaining an artificial image of perfection. For a developing adolescent, this environment creates a profound psychological split. There is the authentic self with its natural vulnerabilities, fears, and developmental needs. And then, there is the corporate product, a polished image that must remain endlessly cheerful, marketable, and compliant to protect a multi-million-dollar corporate network. The psychological toll of this split cannot be overstated. When a child is conditioned to believe that they are only loved and valued when they are performing perfectly, the capacity to form internal self-worth is deeply compromised. Every natural mistake, every bad mood, and every human limitation is viewed as a threat to the entire system. This constant pressure creates an environment where chronic emotional suppression becomes the primary coping mechanism. You perform through exhaustion, you smile through sadness, and you learn to ignore the quiet warning signs your mind and body are sending. For over a decade, This internal pressure cooker was fueled by non-stop filming schedules, global press tours, recording sessions, and a level of public scrutiny that stripped away any semblance of privacy. The world watched a young girl transform into a global pop icon, celebrating her chart-topping hits and massive social media metrics, completely unaware that the structural foundation supporting this empire was developing deep, catastrophic fractures. The human mind is simply not wired to process the projection of millions of strangers simultaneously, especially when those projections demand that you remain an immortal, unproblematic caricature of youth. By the time she reached her early 20s, the artificial separation between her public image and her private reality had become completely unsustainable, setting the stage for a biological and psychological reckoning that would permanently dismantle her carefully constructed world. To truly comprehend the disintegration of Selena Gomez's world in 2016, we must look away from the tabloids and analyze the cold, unforgiving reality of human biology. The public is accustomed to viewing celebrity struggles through a purely dramatic or psychological lens, often dismissing breakdowns as emotional fragility or the inability to handle fame. However, what was occurring inside Gomez's body was a brutal lesson in pathology, a case of biological warfare where the weapon was her own immune system. In 2014, she was quietly diagnosed with systemic lupus erythematosus, a chronic autoimmune disease in which the body's immune system loses its ability to differentiate between foreign invaders and healthy tissue. Instead of protecting the host, the immune system produces autoantibodies that attack vital organs, joints, and tissues, leading to widespread systemic inflammation. For a pop star operating under a relentless global schedule, this diagnosis was a ticking time bomb. The entertainment industry demands absolute physical perfection and stamina, yet lupus inflicts chronic, debilitating fatigue, agonizing joint pain, and unpredictable flare-ups that can render a person completely incapacitated. To keep the massive corporate machinery moving, Gomez initially attempted to hide the diagnosis, a decision that forced her to suppress her physical suffering while performing high-energy choreography under scorching stage lights. When the physical toll became too severe to mask, she underwent courses of chemotherapy, utilizing the heavy immunosuppressive drug Cytoxan to shut down her hyperactive immune system and prevent it from destroying her internal organs. The public, completely unaware of this medical intervention, began fueling toxic rumors regarding substance abuse and erratic behavior, creating a secondary layer of profound psychological trauma. The most insidious aspect of systemic lupus, however, is not the visible physical toll, but its devastating impact on the human brain. Modern neuropsychiatry has established a definitive causal link between chronic peripheral inflammation and severe psychiatric disorders. When an autoimmune condition causes a prolonged surge of inflammatory cytokines in the bloodstream, these proteins can breach the blood-brain barrier. Once inside the central nervous system, they trigger microglial activation, a state of localized brain inflammation that directly disrupts the delicate balance of neurotransmitters. The pathways responsible for manufacturing serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine are compromised, effectively plunging the individual into severe, clinically driven anxiety, panic attacks, and deep depression. This was the invisible reality behind the 2016 cancellation of the Revival Tour. Gomez was not merely exhausted. She was experiencing a severe neurochemical crisis directly manufactured by an autoimmune attack on her brain. The deafening stadium crowds, the flashbulbs of the paparazzi, and the hyperfixation of millions of internet onlookers became a profound sensory nightmare for a nervous system trapped in a permanent state of inflammatory fight or flight. Walking away from that tour was not a career choice, but a desperate act of medical survival. It was a recognition that the human vessel has definitive biological limits, and that no amount of wealth, fame, or public validation can override a systemic physiological collapse. By checking into a secluded rehabilitation facility in Tennessee, she began the agonizingly slow process of dampening the fire inside her body, a journey that would soon require an even more terrifying leap into the unknown. The physical withdrawal from the global stage in 2016 did not signal the end of Selena Gomez's health crisis, but rather marked the beginning of its most dangerous phase. By 2017, the quiet biological warfare taking place within her body had escalated to a critical point. Systemic lupus erythematosus had moved aggressively from targeting her joints and blood chemistry to inflicting irreversible, structural damage on her vital internal organs, specifically her kidneys. She was suffering from severe lupus nephritis, a catastrophic condition where chronic inflammation causes the delicate filtering units of the kidneys to become heavily scarred and progressively non-functional. Her renal system was actively failing, leading to a dangerous buildup of toxic waste products in her bloodstream and a severe drop in physical stamina that left her operating on borrowed time. The medical consensus was absolute. Without an immediate kidney transplant, her survival timeline would be measured in months, not years. The reality of organ transplantation on the black market or through traditional medical registries involves agonizingly long waiting lists that can stretch for years, a luxury of time that Gomez simply did not possess. It was during this period of extreme vulnerability that her close friend and fellow actress, Francia Raisa, made the profound, life-altering decision to volunteer as a living donor. The surgical procedure, which took place in the summer of 2017, was framed by the media as a beautiful cinematic story of ultimate friendship. The sterile reality inside the operating room, however, was a harrowing medical emergency. While the initial removal of Rice's kidney and its placement into Gomez's body began smoothly, a severe complication arose post-operatively. The newly transplanted kidney began to shift, causing a major, high-pressure artery to completely rupture inside Gomez's abdomen. She was rushed back into emergency surgery, a frantic race against time where specialized vascular surgeons had to harvest a vein from her leg to reconstruct a completely new arterial pathway to keep the transplanted organ alive. Had the surgical team failed to secure that artery within minutes, the massive internal bleeding would have been fatal, or the new kidney would have suffered total ischemic death. The physical trauma of this multi-hour emergency surgery left her with deep abdominal scars, severe physical weakness, and a prolonged, painful recovery process that completely transformed her relationship with her own physical form. Yet, the hidden architecture of organ transplantation contains a secondary, deeply complex psychological phenomenon known as recipient guilt. When a human being receives a piece of another living person's body to survive, the interpersonal dynamics are permanently altered. The recipient does not merely feel gratitude. They often carry an overwhelming subconscious sense of debt that can become deeply suffocating. Gomez found herself grappling with the heavy realization that her survival had come at the direct cost of a friend's physical suffering, a prolonged surgical recovery, and a permanent alteration of that friend's own health profile. The public demand for this story to remain a flawless, heartwarming narrative of Hollywood's sisterhood left no room for the raw, messy, and complicated human emotions that followed the procedure. This complex psychological burden, combined with the heavy doses of immunosuppressive medications required to prevent her body from rejecting the new organ, directly impacted her vulnerable neurochemistry. The emotional stress of this profound interpersonal debt, happening under the unyielding gaze of the international media, created a severe psychological weight that threatened to completely shatter her fragile emotional equilibrium, leading directly toward her next major mental health crisis. The biological trauma of the operating room, combined with the intense psychological demands of global stardom, eventually led to a critical breakdown in the fall of 2018. While the public was focused on major developments in her personal life and toxic media narratives surrounding her past relationships, Selena Gomez's physical health took a dangerous turn. Her white blood cell count dropped to an alarmingly low level, a frequent and dangerous complication for lupus patients on heavy immunosuppressive therapy. This medical crisis required an immediate, high-security hospitalization at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. When a second consecutive low white blood cell count triggered a severe emotional spiral, her nervous system reached a breaking point, resulting in a severe acute psychotic break. In this state of profound psychological distress, she experienced a complete detachment from reality, driven by a brain structure that had been battered by years of chronic autoimmune inflammation and continuous emotional suppression. The intense panic led her to attempt to rip life-saving medical equipment out of her arms, forcing medical professionals to transfer her to a specialized psychiatric unit at McLean Hospital in Massachusetts. It was there, away from the flashing cameras and the constant noise of the entertainment industry, that she received a definitive diagnosis of bipolar disorder. This clinical classification finally provided a logical framework for the intense periods of mania and deep, debilitating depression that had quietly driven her behavior for years. The path to recovery from a psychotic break and a new psychiatric diagnosis required a total shift in how she approached her mental health. She moved away from standard talk therapy and leaned heavily into dialectical behavior therapy, a highly structured psychological framework specifically designed to help individuals manage intense emotional dysregulation. This clinical approach focused on developing 4 core skills: mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, and interpersonal effectiveness. Gomez had to completely rewire how her mind processed stress, learning to observe her intense emotional waves without immediately reacting to them or allowing them to dictate her reality. As part of this structured reclamation, she implemented a strict 90-day digital detox, completely removing her personal access to social media platforms. By handing her passwords over to her management team and deleting the applications from her devices, she cut off the continuous flow of public judgment and toxic comparison that had fueled her hypervigilance for over a decade. This digital isolation allowed her overstimulated nervous system to finally downregulate, returning her brain chemistry to a stable baseline. To support this behavioral therapy, she incorporated canine-assisted behavioral activation into her daily recovery routine. Having been raised around abandoned animals in Texas, she turned to rescuing dogs as the deliberate, therapeutic tool for managing her clinical depression. Caring for multiple rescue animals forced her to build a stable, outer-focused daily routine, breaking the cycle of staying in bed and dwelling on her pain. The absolute, unconditional affection of these animals provided a safe emotional space that required no performance or perfection. Feeding, walking, and caring for creatures that depended entirely on her survival served as a powerful motivator to get out of bed, even on days when the weight of depression felt impossible to lift. This deliberate combination of structured clinical therapy, a complete stroke, and the grounding presence of her rescue animals allowed her to step out of the psychiatric crisis and begin constructing a completely new, sovereign identity built on radical self-acceptance. Reclaiming her mental and physical baseline required Selena Gomez to systematically dismantle the toxic ghosts of her past romantic life. For nearly a decade, the international media had obsessively commodified her cyclical, highly publicized relationships, turning her private emotional pain into a highly profitable narrative for internet tabloids. This constant public dissection created a secondary layer of relational trauma, where her identity was perpetually tethered to the actions and choices of others. To break free from this exhausting cycle, Gomez had to consciously step away from the expectation of public perfection and lean into the reality of radical vulnerability. This emotional evolution prepared the ground for her relationship with record producer Benny Blanco. Meeting not under the blinding lights of a red carpet, but within the collaborative, creative sanctuary of the recording studio, their connection was built on a foundation of mutual professional respect and shared history. Blanco, known for his grounded approach to life and the music industry, provided an environment that contrasted sharply with the chaotic, hyper-competitive atmospheres of her past. In this relationship, there was no need to perform or mask her vulnerabilities. Blanco openly accommodated her complex physical and psychological needs, demonstrating an understanding of the daily realities of managing an autoimmune disease and bipolar disorder. The relationship progressed from a private sanctuary to a public declaration of stability. By late 2023, Gomez formally confirmed their relationship, defending their partnership against online critics who favored the dramatic, toxic narratives of her past. This bond reflected her deep commitment to dialectical behavior therapy, showcasing her ability to protect her peace and choose stability over public approval. The partnership reached a definitive milestone in September 2025, when the couple married in a private, deeply meaningful ceremony that prioritized genuine human connection over Hollywood spectacle. Entering 2026, their collaborative interviews continue to highlight a shared vision of family, mutual emotional healing, and a quiet, structured lifestyle far removed from the constant noise of the paparazzi. By choosing a partner who values her authentic self rather than her global brand, Gomez successfully replaced the chaotic, performance-based relationships of her youth with a secure, protective partnership, proving that true happiness is found when you stop looking for validation from the world and build a private sanctuary of mutual respect. The final transformation of Selena Gomez from a vulnerable child star into a sovereign architect of global mental health care demonstrates that true survival is measured by what you build from your own broken pieces. Instead of allowing her diagnoses of systemic lupus and bipolar disorder to remain private points of shame, she structurally shifted her entire multi-million-dollar business empire to address global systemic failures in psychiatric care. Through the creation of the Rare Impact Fund, she committed 1% of all global cosmetic sales directly to increasing access to mental health resources in underserved communities, directly addressing the massive service gaps caused by economic scarcity that she first witnessed as a child in Texas. This sustainable financial model ensures that her professional legacy is no longer tethered to the superficial cycles of Hollywood validation, but to the tangible survival of young people fighting the exact same invisible battles that nearly cost Gomez her own life behind closed hospital doors. Her physical journey is written across her skin, marked by the deep surgical scars of a near-fatal organ transplant that she spent years trying to hide from the judgment of the public eye. Today, those markings are displayed not as symbols of brokenness, but as proud evidence of a fierce biological and spiritual resilience that refused to surrender to the overwhelming pressures of an unyielding industry. Her story stands as a definitive message to millions of individuals around the world who are currently trapped in the suffocating darkness of clinical depression, systemic illness, or profound emotional heartbreak. She has proven that rock bottom is not a permanent destination, but a structural foundation upon which an authentic, peaceful, and fiercely independent life can be permanently rebuilt. If this deeply researched journey of medical survival and personal rebirth has brought value to your perspective, take a moment to explore the other investigative biographical narratives available on our channel. The road to human healing is rarely a straight line, but by choosing to step away from the artificial noise of perfection, we unlock the strength to construct our own safe sanctuaries.